Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Witches Movie Coven. Yes, I am Patti Negri, your host for the day, along with Jason Mankey, your other witch host for the day. And yes, something looks slightly different than last week. Heather Greene, our beautiful Heather Greene, and the goddess of all witch movies, is stuck in a hurricane in Florida right now. Yes, indeed she is. I mean, she's okay. She's stuck in Florida. She hasn't gotten whooped up and house landed on her yet or anything, but she won't be with us. But instead, we have a very, very special treat. We have fellow witch Courtney Buckley, all the way from the Salem area. Hi, Courtney. Thank you for jumping in.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm very excited. I love this movie. I love this show, and I love you guys, so I'm very excited.
And we're thrilled to have you. I want to say hi to Matthew, his favorite people. Yes, because we brought Courtney in, and to Mandy. Hi, Mandy, one of my ghost sisters. Okay, so Jason, why don't you start this week? Our main movie that we're going to talk about is The Witch. It's a spooky one.
So, yeah, it's weird to talk about these movies with Heather not being here. And I was hoping she would do live weather reports for us, but that didn't happen. So, The Witch, like subtitled A New England Folktale, is a very different sort of horror movie. And it really just focuses on one family who are kind of ostracized from their Puritan town that they live in, and they go deep into the wilderness to live by themselves. And while they are there, mysterious things begin to happen. Also, while they're there, their goat, Black Phillip, begins acting a little strangely, not always in the nicest way. There are different ways to interpret what happens in The Witch. It could be all psychological in the mind of Tamsin, which is the young woman who is sort of the main protagonist of the film. Or it could be, seriously, that there are witches living in the wilderness in the late 17th century in the United States. One of the things I love the most about this movie is that some of the dialogue comes straight from witch trials of the era and from letters written about the witch trials of the era and some courtroom testimony, which makes it unlike any witch movie or horror movie ever produced before. There's an element of sort of realism to it. If you've ever read Margaret Murray's The Witch Cult in Western Europe, this is the witch cult in Western Europe brought to life. And it really feels like you're in the middle of that book with what happens in it, in the movie. And it's just terrific, and it's so different. And we'll talk all about Black Phillip and butter and living deliciously as we go on. I know Courtney was part of the early promotion of the movie because Courtney is in Salem, and I just find that fascinating. That you
so tell us.
Yeah, so I work for a company called Salem Night Tours in Salem, Massachusetts, and our company was asked to be part of the promotion. When movies come out, they run like a contest or whatever it is. Well, The Witch, when it came out, did a premiere in Salem at the Salem Cinema, and part of the promotional package that people could win was a tour with my company. But working in Salem and doing these tours, this movie has come up a lot in questions that I've been asked, was this based on Salem and everything else? And my interpretation of it and what I share with people, let me turn my light down a little bit because I feel like my interpretation of it is in relevance to like the tours that I give and the stories that I tell, is that this isn't necessarily what people experienced in Salem in 1692, but these are the stories that they were told to scare them away from doing the things that the religion didn't want them to do. So like this was the horror story that they would tell them, to keep kids away from getting into trouble or whatever it was. That's my interpretation of it. But I think, The Witch as a movie, I'm a big fan of the studio that produced it, A24, and all their movies. I think in addition to everything that Jason just said, which makes it amazing and stands out, also things like the cinematography, the sounds that they use, they piped in sounds that like you don't even know you're listening to, but it increases anxiety. And I just think that everything that they do is so clever, and it really, really worked well with what they did on this movie for The Witch.
I agree. It was just scary, because you also want to look at the religious craziness is like, what, beyond all the spooky stuff, but even the coloring, the darkness of it, you have to look so hard to see what you're doing. It just tensed you up from beginning to end, which is, what you want in that kind of a movie. But, and then you feel for that. I mean, I felt for her. Thomas said, it's like, oh my gosh, this poor girl. I'd have floated up too.
It feels like a lot of these movies are about human beings versus the wilderness. There is something very real about them being estranged and living in the woods. I was reading up on the movie, and Robert Eggers, who wrote the film and directed the film, they had to shoot in Canada because they couldn't find any place in the United States with enough tax breaks. And it was really important to him that he got like the forest just right. It had to be threatening. And he ended up saying that they ended up in a place so remote that it made cities in New Hampshire look like giant metropolises or something like that. So it was a very like rural sort of place because he had to get that feeling of foreboding of this one small family being alone in the woods. And when you hear a weird knock or hear a weird sound, you don't know where it's coming from or if it's coming to get you.
Yeah. Now somebody just put up something. They said it's an Adam and Eve story. So it's just people alone, I guess. No snake. Or is the goat the snake? Is Philip the snake? I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Does it work for that? I don't know. Sadly, we can't ask you. You could type everything, but that's a lot to type. Person who jumped in on that.
It's certainly a coming of age story for Thomasin. I mean, there's like she's embracing her personal power as she watches her family collapse in front of her, and her family is unnecessarily cruel to her. They blame her for things that go wrong. Her youngest sibling is whisked away while under her care, and then her mother kind of blames her for it while it's not her fault at all while they were playing peekaboo. The father sells a cup that is really precious to his wife, and he doesn't tell her that he sold the cup, so they blame Thomasin, of course, right? So she's really kind of crapped on a lot, and by the end, she's fully in her power. One of the things I love about Black Phillip, do you want to live deliciously? Do you want to travel the world? Do you like the taste of butter? I am going to empower you to do the things that you want to do if you will sign my name to your book. To me, it's like I'm rooting against the Christian family the whole way through. It's what they're doing is repressive. It just, it bothers me so much. And I want her to embrace the goat.
And Thomasin is such a badass character, especially by the end. Like you expect her to get like beat down, like you're watching her get beat down, and all these really frustrating things, and that emotion that it's building up in you as you watch the movie. That to me is the mark of a good movie. When you feel something while you're watching it. And I almost leapt out of my seat at the end because I was so excited for her that she just didn't take it anymore and went off and lived her delicious life.
Yeah, me too. Agreed wholeheartedly. Because all the things they did to her, and she would stand up to him. She would stand up to this little girl. It's like who didn't do any of those things that they.
And that's something in Salem in 1692 that if you turned around and acted like that, you'd be right off to the gallows.
And then again, all the religious undertones to everything, even with each of the family, isn't that like going into like the 7 deadly sins? Isn't each of those family, everybody except for her, except for Thomasin, we had the lust and the greed and the pride and whatever else all those things are represented in this holy family.
I think it really speaks to, like you were saying, Jason, like the oppression of religion and, how they're trying so hard to like live this strict religious life, but really like it's impossible. And then, the freedom of coming into yourself and giving up those shackles essentially, and then moving forward in your power. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, I think.
Yeah, and what a delicious life it was. Yes. I think Haley kind of explained her, I think it was her idea about the Adam and Eve. The whole thing is about religion, yes, where Puritans are controlled by God and the family was tempted, except the mother. They were banished like Adam and Eve because the father gave in to sin. Son, but sin. But didn't they all give in to sin? Didn't they all? And did the mother not? Or was her lack of faith considered a sin in religious circles? I don't know.
I would say like her blame of everything on Thomasin doesn't speak well of her. I mean, Thomasin's really the only virtuous character the whole way through. She basically cares about everybody until there's a point where she's just too pushed to, to give a damn, especially about her dad anymore. And even her mother to some degree, right? But she's the one with the strength. She's the one always trying to do the right thing. She's the one looking out for the kids, I think, more than anybody else. And yeah, and then the rest of them, you think about it, like, her little brother is, staring at her chest at one point. The father is lying. The mother, I find, there's so many flaws I find with the mother, just the way she handles her children and stuff. And then there's Thomasin, a rock finding herself.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent portrayal of the quote that people misquote from the Bible: the blood of the or they say blood is thicker than water, but it's really the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. And her family treats her the way her family does, and then along comes Black Phillip promising her this life of freedom. And, I'm sure that that's somewhere she found a lot more acceptance than she did with her family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I must say, I try not to look at it like from the producery side of things, but I think the casting was brilliant. And I don't usually even try to notice stuff like that, but just like the father's voice, just the sound of the timbre of his voice every time, it was almost a character in itself to me. And the little kids and her, how she stood up for himself. I thought kudos to how they cast it.
I think that's a very important thing for A24 movies to pay attention to. I know what you're saying, but A24 puts so much into that, like all those little details, that's what makes their movies so great, in my opinion.
So what are some of the other A24 movies? I'm not familiar with the production.
Hereditary was one. Midsummer, which was incredible. Another one that had me jumping out of my chair at the end. They just came out with one, X and Pearl. The Lighthouse with was it William Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. They're just like subject matter you can take or leave, but the production value that goes into them makes them incredible.
Did they do Sir Gawain in The Green Knight too? I think they did. I think that was
I feel like
which is another movie we have to talk about on this show at one point. And when you talk about the casting being on point, that was Anya Taylor-Joy's first film, and she's a huge movie star now. If you've watched the chess show on Netflix, oh gosh, what's the name of that show? She's the
Queen's Gambit.
Queen's Gambit. She's so good in that, right? Like her presence is magnetic. You can't take your eyes off of her. And there's so much attention to detail in that movie. I was reading something about how they were worried about her earlobes because you could see the piercing, like everybody has earrings, right? And they needed to cover that up because they wouldn't have had earrings back then. I mean, the Puritans thought belt buckles were ostentatious, let alone having a pair of earrings. There's that attention to detail that I really love. I think that's something that's in all of Eggers' films because, Midsummer is something we're going to have to talk about eventually too. And that movie's so amazing and weird.
Please have me back on for that one. I have so many
Come on in, Quinn. Okay. We will. You're great. And we thank you for jumping in on this. This is great. And she knows the movie. Movies. Okay. Now that you're sitting there holding Black Phillip, let's talk about Black Phillip or goats in general and goats and witches and that connection. What is that connection, Jason? Hint, hint, nod, nod. Say no more. Say no more.
It goes back a long way. I mean, it goes back to the early modern period, at least the end of the Middle Ages, where we're dealing with witch trials. And animals that could be sort of domestic but not truly controlled are always a little suspect. And goats are like that. You can keep goats, but you can't really keep goats. They're stubborn. They have their own way of doing things. And then you've also kind of got the horns on top of the goat's head, which a lot of people have over the centuries have equated horns on top of heads to Satan. Most of us know better. But yeah, so the goat was always sort of a suspect animal. Speaking of Black Phillip, though, in the film, one of the coolest things in the movie, and I'm not sure that most people even notice it, but when Thomasin says, Black Phillip, speak to me, she goes to see Black Phillip. And then he finally talks, which is like an amazing moment of itself, right? Like it's tingling. Like you just feel it and you're like, oh my God, this is happening. This is happening. And then he starts walking. If you look closely, first you see a hoof hit the ground. And then you see his feet hit the ground as human feet in black shoes. One of the representations of the devil, especially during that period of the witch trials, was always of a man who was well groomed, often wearing dark clothing. He didn't necessarily always have to look like an animal. So they went kind of both ways. They have the goat there, but then all of a sudden they also have the really well-dressed guy. It's just a moment that I love, and I had to talk about it because it's just so subtle. And then all of a sudden, Black Phillip rises in his full power. If this one ever turned into a human being in the middle of the night, though, I would probably crap my pants. But
he'd be the cutest Black Phillip ever, though. Yeah. He's an awfully cute Black Phillip there. I must say, I'm going to have to go watch the end of that movie again. I don't remember the shoes to the feet, but it's so dark. It's like, I must have had a low screen on my screen. It's like, I don't remember that.
I had to watch that movie a couple. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. It's a small thing. And you know what? Like, I love that end of the movie so much that I could have just made it up. But I swear, I see the hoof, and then all of a sudden the hoof is walking. And it transforms into like a man in a shoe, and it's they don't really ever show the man in black. They don't ever show Black Phillip really once he transforms. He's just kind of this figure, this presence in the background, and kind of looming over everything. You feel that energy, and I think towards the end of the film too, when things really break down, when Black Phillip decides that he's really kind of tired of taking orders from the man of the house and that he's going to headbutt him, you can kind of like all of a sudden all these things come into play, and you can kind of feel that presence all of a sudden in the film, that things are about to get real and the shit is about to hit the fan.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got way off of just talking.
No, you didn't. No, this is great. You did not. No. And our producer Rob put up a really, which again, I'm going back to the makings of movies. Didn't the director had a quote something about, how everybody always says about never work with animals or children. And according to the director, you can't train a goat. The goat was a nightmare. Fuck it. I didn't mean to say that. I was just reading.
I think I haven't gotten impactful without it, so I think you need to have the F word in there. So
yeah, but I said so. The goat's eyes were really super. Yeah, the goat. It's the eyes. It's the eye. Everything about the eyes. Well, aren't the eyes the window of the soul? Isn't everything about eyes always? That's what you put on.
And goat eyes are really weird. They're really creepy looking in person, I think. But I was gonna say before, Patty, you were talking about how you might have missed something. I had to watch this movie probably 3 or 4 times with subtitles, really, to get the full, like, I went and saw it in the movie theater, and I missed so much of it because I couldn't follow, all the things that they were saying. So I had to go home and watch it again with subtitles. And it took like 2 or 3, 4 times for me to really get the full impact of it. But I knew I loved it enough to keep watching it. And so it's one of those things where every time you watch it, you can pick up something different. And that's another thing of the 80,000 things that I love about this movie.
I saw it in the theater, and my wife and I went with another couple, and this other couple like claimed to like horror movies. And so we got done and we're walking out, and like I'm kind of dumbstruck at the end of the movie just because I'm like, oh wow, I cannot believe that happened. And then I looked at my friends and I was like, so what did you think? And they just kind of shook their head and had no idea what to think. Because, it's not a gory movie. It's not a conventional horror film in any way. And if you're a witch, I think that you really love it. And if you're not, or you're not really kind of a like, it's a sophisticated movie in its own way because it's got its own pace and it's got that weird language, and I don't think people expect that.
Right. Yeah. It takes you into another world. It really does. And somebody had wrote earlier in the chat room, it makes you feel like you are really there in this other very foreign, sad, scary world.
And it's very isolating. Like, even when you're watching it, it feels very isolating. Like, you always want, or at least I do, because I like to yell at the screen when I watch horror movies. I don't know about you guys, but I'll always scream like, "Oh my God, turn around," or "No, don't go up there." But like, for this movie, there's nowhere for them to go. Like, you can't, like, what are you supposed to do? You're out in the middle of wherever you are in New England, and there's nobody around. So there's nowhere to go for help. And so that, to me, made it almost more anxiety inducing, that, like, knowing that there was not going to be someone to swoop in and save the day, you know, they had to deal with this themselves.
When you watch a lot of horror movies, you notice that, like, the cast is only like 8 or 10 people, right? Like, horror movies are popular because they're cheap in Hollywood and they usually get big returns. And The Witch has a small cast, you know, it's that one little farm that they're at and the woods behind it, but at the same time it feels immense because of the immensity of the woods, right? Like, you feel like you're in this big gigantic place, but it makes you feel smaller because all of this is around you and you have absolutely no control over it.
Yeah.
And I think, I forget who said it, but someone said, like, the father's voice is its own character, like the woods is its own character. You know, there's so many different pieces to this movie, more than just, you know, the characters and the location. Like, it's so well done. I don't have anything bad to say about it.
And again, like we started out, it's very representation of the time, of religious persecution, of male-female relationships. You can get really political if you want, or you could just scare your pants off.
Yeah.
And I was reading the chat, and, you know, some people think that it doesn't give a very good portrayal of witches. And I mean, and to some degree, that's true. It's not the most sympathetic, but it really is based on how people thought witches might act back then. And they had, like, these really diabolical ideas about witches. But if you really go and you look at the material from the early modern period and the late Middle Ages, during the time of the witch trials, the witches really were pretty benign. You know, they feasted, they danced, they had orgies, they ate, like I already said, they feasted. They had initiation ceremonies, which, you know, maybe required kissing somebody on the buttocks or something. But I mean, it's all pretty benign, with the exception of having to sacrifice children. You know, in some ways, being a witch was like the wish fulfillment of a time with food scarcity, when you weren't allowed to have fun, right? Like, if you even thought about witches, or you drew pictures of witches or whatever, you could put yourself in a world that was more freeing. However, it was a world where, you know, you were supposed to worship Satan. So there was a caveat.
Right. I was actually, it was interesting what Courtney opened up this whole thing with, saying that from her experience and her working in Salem and doing tours and stuff, that this is what the stories they told versus how it was. These were the scary stories, so you don't, you know, go into that scary world. That's fascinating to me.
Well, if you look back at, like, what the Puritans were doing in that time, like, they were getting up in the morning, doing their chores, walking to church, walking home from, like, sitting for church services, walking home, doing their nighttime chores and going to bed. And anything outside of that really was, like, we don't do that, you know, and because that's not living the good Puritan life. And human beings can't consistently live like that. So you're going to always have the one or two people who just aren't going to go along with it. And then, you know what, like, you're going to ostracize them. They're going to live out on the outskirts of town. They're going to be like the town pariah. And then it's a very quick hop, skip, and a jump when you're scared of something, or, you know, whatever, they're causing trouble, or they're maybe even leading other people to think the same way. Maybe other people are watching them live a different life and thinking, I can live a different life too. And it's a hop, skip, and a jump to calling them a witch, which was so feared because of this, that, you know, then we get into mass hysteria, then we get into that whole thing. But it's like, to me, I can very easily see, the kids sitting around the fire at night before going to bed and their parents warning them with a story like this to scare them away from even looking into living any other different life.
Yeah, and it would scare you away. It's like, I wanted to discuss this. Haley, beautiful. We love all you guys' input. This is great. Watching it and skiing home in a snowstorm is great. Somebody wrote that they thought that it represented witchcraft of the day, but not witchcraft now. But I mean, I am not a scholar on witchcraft of the day, but I still don't think it was the worshiping of Satan.
No, I think that back in that time, you have people doing healing or like using different herbs to cure different things, and that's considered a witch.
Well, yeah, and Satan is not the horn god. And that's, I think they all got squished together, right, Jason?
There's like a subgroup in witchcraft. Like often today they call themselves traditional witches, and they really look to folklore to inform their practices. And one of the pieces in folklore that they're really interested these days is the folkloric devil from this particular period of time. Not the folkloric devil as, oh, I rule hell and I'm, anti-Jesus and God, but as a figure of empowerment, as a figure of enlightenment. And again, if you like really read the witch trials, for the most part, it's not like this figure ever made anybody do anything that was all that bad. I mean, you had to go to a Sabbath and, fly on a broom and have an orgy. How terrible for you. I mean, a lot of people would love to be in your place, right? So there are people who are really interested in this kind of version of the horn god. Certainly, though, the horn god has never been the Christian Satan or whatever. The whole conception of Satan really is of a fallen angel, not a figure of the earth so much, a figure that came from heaven and then was pushed down. And, the horn god is a being of joy and life and love, not somebody who wants to punish others. So that's never really been the horn god's modus operandi, to act like Satan, And even, again, like when there is Satan in a lot of these things, it's usually not so bad. Rosemary's Baby being an exception.
And I can't wait to talk about that one. Yeah, but I guess that's just so again, maybe that's what the religious or the church wants people to think. Again, goats, horns, Satan, horn god, green man, all those, Pan.
Especially a god like Pan, who is representative of wild places, which are places that can't be controlled by the Christian church. Also sort of the wilder impulses that we have as human beings, which again, they can't control and are desperate to try to control. So it's easy to vilify a god like Pan, especially. Though, Christians thought that all pagan deities at the time were, manifestations of the devil or demons or something else or whatever. But Pan was an easy one to pick on. And then in the 19th century, you have Baphomet, which is Eliphas Levi's, androgynous figure, breasts, but otherwise presents quite male. I love Baphomet because of the androgyny of Baphomet.
Me too.
I mean that when people like today show pictures of the devil, they're really often showing this version of Baphomet, which is at the end of the 19th century. Back during the late Renaissance, like the late Middle Ages, early modern period, a lot of representations of the devil certainly did have horns, and sometimes they were ghosts, but they were also chickens sometimes and other animals, and very often looked quite reptilian instead of like the figure that we most associate with like a horned devil today. A lot of that, as I said, I think really comes from Levi. So it's always sort of this evolution when it comes to horned figures and how Christians perceive them.
Right. And the Baphomet Satan confusion, isn't that, again, I am not an expert on this, but don't Satanists kind of have taken Baphomet as their picture of Satan?
Certainly the church, what is it? The Satanic Temple, of which there is one in Salem. They have a big statue that they were trying to get on public grounds, I think in Oklahoma, and it ended up not working out. So it's there. And he really does kind of mostly look like Baphomet. But I think they like Baphomet because of the worldliness of Baphomet. Baphomet represents sort of everything, because you do have the male and female and everything in between. He's holding a globe of the world. He has his hand up for knowledge. He represents everything. And I think that's why they like him. And the Satanic Temple is really an atheist organization, not really a religious organization.
Right.
That statue's totally worth seeing. Also, it's also worth mentioning that the Satanic Temple sued the makers of Sabrina the Teenage Witch for copying their Baphomet statue.
Really? Did they win?
I think that they did win, because it's pretty obvious that they were using that as their template. I mean, their version's a lot more stylized than the old Levi version from the 19th century. Baphomet, like the history of Baphomet is quite fascinating too. Baphomet was originally probably a head, and it was probably something having to do with Islam and anything else. And like the Templars were said to worship Baphomet, and then it was a term that was picked up by Levi, and then he draws this figure that most of us are familiar with today. So it's really kind of an aside, but Baphomet, fascinating figure.
I think too, what's interesting is like when you go into Salem today, not only do you have the Satanic Temple that you can look at and learn all about go through Salem and learn all about the history, but when you go to the Salem Witch Museum, which is one of the most popular spots in Salem for tourists, you go into this room and you're looking around at these wax figures that are telling you the story of the Salem witch trials, and in the corner is a 9-10 foot tall, dark horned, cloven feet, red eyes, goat devil thing, and it's very much the image, and it's terrifying, honestly, but it still is carried on today with that. People, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people go in there every year and look at it.
But at the end, where you're brought into like a smaller museum and there's like the little Wiccan thing at the end. I love that museum. It's so much fun. I was there just last year, and all my pictures are coming up on social media, and it makes me sad that I'm not there right now.
I know. I'm sad I'm not there. The Vampire Ball is there this weekend. I'm not there because I'm doing another event. I'm doing in Orange County Paracon, but usually, and last year I was at the Vampire Ball, which is really fun. And somebody wrote there just they'd never been to Salem. Go to Salem. Oh, Sam, go to Salem. It's a beautiful, amazing, rich, full. It's a beautiful city. So right now it's a little crazy. Is it a little crazy there right now, Courtney?
Oh boy, don't even get me started. It is. So for anyone thinking about coming to Salem, if you have to book accommodations a year in advance for October, we get on Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, we get upwards of 100,000 visitors, or we have in the past. This year looks like it's going to be a little bit crazier. And it's a small New England town. Like, I mean, it's a city technically, but we have cobblestone streets that were not designed like the streets of New York to handle bazillions of people, and yet bazillions of people come into the city. So it's definitely a great place. The vibe is great in October, but Salem is year round, and you can get the history year round, and you can enjoy the sights year round. But yeah, it is starting to get nuts. I'm exhausted, and it's not even October 1st yet.
So she said, don't go in October, go all the other 11 months of the year, and then she'll give you a tour.
Yeah, don't go this October, because that ship has sailed for anyone. But go next October, start planning this October.
But there's not very many hotels there, because it is a little New England town, right? There's one big hotel, and that's it. I mean, there's a couple. There's been a couple of new ones that have cropped up right in downtown area within the past couple of years. But yeah, they give preference. Hotels in Salem give preference to people who are checking out for October this year. So when they check out, they'll ask them if they want to book again for the next season, for the next year. And then once all that's said and done on November 1st, usually is when they open their books up for everyone else. So it's tough to get a room right in Salem, but we have like a commuter rail that you can, stay in one of the outlying cities and commute in on the commuter rail. But parking is tough, driving is tough. There's street closures and everything else. But having said all that,
it's one of the coolest things that you could ever do, I think, especially if you're a fan of witchcraft history, if you're a fan of maritime history. We have everything in Salem. You know, and Halloween. If you love Halloween, that's the place to be.
The maritime stuff, again, I kind of skipped that class in school, I think. The maritime history, there is a huge maritime thing there.
There is. Don't ask me any questions about it, because I don't like to learn about that.
Why?
Because I like to learn about the witch trials. So that's what I like to talk about. And I don't know. I'm not great with names and dates unless it has to do with the witch trials. So I do know that Salem was one of the first and foremost and largest trading seaports in the country when it was active. And the first elephant to ever be seen in the United States came through the port in Salem. Came from India.
Really?
And it was drunk. It was drunk when it got here.
The elephant?
The elephant was drunk. Because they ran out. They didn't know. They'd never taken care of an elephant, so they didn't have enough water on board. So they had to feed it the only thing that they had, which was ale. So the elephant arrived drunk.
Drunken elephant.
It sounds like the elephant could have co-hosted our show.
I
know.
Like
bring him in. Come on down, elephant. Haley, I agree with you. Hard time believing witches killed children and rolled in their blood unless being ruled by Satan. I've never killed children or rolled in blood. What do I know?
That certainly did not. That certainly did not happen. There's absolutely no evidence of anything like that ever happening. And that is an old accusation that goes back to ancient Rome, where Christians were accused of that. Jews were later accused of that. Followers of Dionysus at one point were accused of that. A lot of these sort of rumors about religious groups get recycled and reused over and over and over again, depending on who is being targeted by the people in power in a society. So yeah, the witches were accused of it isn't a surprise, because everybody else had been accused of it as well at various points.
So that must be like the most evil thing you can do in the world is, kill children, eat children, and roll in their blood. So that means you're bad. Perhaps that. Yeah.
And I mean, we saw the return of that with Satanic Panic in the 80s. That was one of the big things, is that there were farms of people having babies that were being then sacrificed in satanic rituals, of course, with absolutely no evidence of any of that, because none of that ever happened. But, we're also seeing it again now with QAnon and stuff. Yeah, it's just rinse and repeat over and over and over again.
Right, because you read it, because you see it, because you hear it, must be true. No. Black Phillip, he wants to talk about goats. He wants to talk about other movies, since we do always, or they are often related together, goats and witches and witch movies. And I know, Jason, you know some of this, since we don't have lovely hair. What are some of the other movies that have goats in them and witches that we can maybe one of these days talk about?
Well, I think eventually we'll talk about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is notable for Mr. Tumnus, who is basically a satyr, right? And a very benign figure. Here's a person that looks like a goat that's a good guy, not a bad guy, which is always nice. And then the same for Pan's Labyrinth, which is a Del Toro movie, which was the first foreign language film that I ever saw. Was so immersed in that movie, I swear by the end they were speaking English. I was so into that. But the satyr in that movie, again, is benign. He's an escape for the little girl living in fascist Spain at the time. Great movie. So there's that. Also in Hercules, you have Danny DeVito as a satyr-like character who helps Hercules. Not my favorite representation of a goat-like person in a movie, and I do like Danny DeVito, but I wanted my Pan figure to be a little kind of taller, and maybe not Danny DeVito as much as I
a character goat. Character goat. Somebody wrote, I don't know this, The Devil's Reign, Borgnine is quite goatish. Ernest Borgnine, is he goat?
This is when we really miss Heather, right? Because she knows every movie
in the world. She knows every movie in the world.
Oh, Horns is a good one.
Oh yes, Horns. Yeah, that's a terrific movie. That's Daniel Radcliffe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that movie. So that movie, I don't know if you guys know this, but Horns was written by Dan Hill, is that his name? Who is Stephen King's son. And I used to be a very avid reader. I still am, but I don't have a lot of time yet. But Dan Hill wrote one of the only books that scared me so bad that I still to this day, like a decade and a half later, have not been able to finish, which was Heart-Shaped Box. So I was expecting a lot of great things from Horns, and I loved it. And then he also wrote the short story that inspired the new movie that just came out, The Black Phone, which is hands down one of my favorite movies.
Oh,
sorry, that's my useless trivia.
No, good. That's what this is. This is the Witches Movie Coven. This is good. Go, Courtney.
I have so many opinions about horror movies.
In television, one of my favorite horned or antlered figures. There's a show that was on in the 80s on the BBC called Sherwood, and Robin Hood's mentor in Sherwood is Herne the Hunter. Exactly like you would expect Herne the Hunter to look. So again, it's another benign horned god sort of figure. That show doesn't really get enough love from pagans just because it's so cool that it has Herne the Hunter in it with Robin Hood. Wow. Yeah, that's definitely kind of a really cool one. That's fun. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, sometimes we need Heather because she knows all of them off the top.
I know she knows all the movies. So jump in, Courtney. No.
I mean, I could talk, if you want to talk about a different movie that has nothing to do with horns, I could talk about Hereditary for the rest of my life. So
we are going to discuss Hereditary eventually. Maybe we'll have to have you back when we do that.
I would love to. That and Midsummer I could talk about. And The Black Phone that just came out. That was a great one. So I have a lot of opinion. I don't love every horror movie. In fact, I dislike most of them, but these are some of my favorites.
Are horror movies your favorite genre movie, period? Are they?
Yeah, I think I want them to be every time. But I don't end up liking them all because I have very particular wants and needs from a horror movie. And I don't always get that. Like, I don't like to see the monster. I would, because I feel like in most movies, they can't do it justice to like what the buildup is. And then it's disappointing. And I don't like that. And most of the time I feel like the endings of the movies are terrible. So I leave the theater feeling upset about it. But there have been a few, like Hereditary was the first one for a long time. I'd been looking for like a ghost or possession movie that would just scare my pants off. And I sat in the movie theater parking lot for a solid 40 minutes after that and like just did some deep breathing because I didn't know what I had just seen. And it was so good. But most of the time I don't usually like them. I want to.
We have a comment about The Magicians on Netflix Sci-Fi. It's one of my favorite shows. I love The Magicians, I love the book. And one of the figures in there is Horn. It's not a particularly benign figure. Also, one of my other favorite shows, Evil. Like there's a figure there that has horns that's supposed to be demonic. And that it's kind of tough for somebody who loves the Horn God and loves Black Phillip quite a bit, to the point where I take this thing anywhere I go, even overseas. And sometimes I don't know how I feel about it. I kind of get mad that this is the trope that they want to use over and over again. But I also realize that for, the majority of probably society, when they see a horned figure, they assume that it's a negative, that it's an evil thing. And it kind of gives them a heads up. But to me, it's so positive. And in various other points of time, horns and antlers have been positive. There's a statue of Moses with horns on it, for example.
That's what I was just going to say. What I remember in early days, and I don't remember which culture, whatever, that it was a sign of wisdom, I think wisdom over holiness, wisdom. And there is a statue with Moses with horns.
Yeah. And during the Renaissance, it was popular to say that horns are a way to connect to the sacredness of nature. That it wasn't a way to connect to evil. It was a way to connect with the greater world. And, somewhere along the way, we kind of lost that, which is really sad. But witches are taking that back, which is one thing I really love about witches and witchcraft.
Yeah, we are taking it back. I'm sorry. I just I just kept picturing you flying overseas with Philip, the Black Philip, and he would make a really nice headrest.
He does. He really makes a great
That's
headrest.
what I thought. I'm like,
I've used him that way before. I took him to England this year, and we went to the Chalice Well together. And I took pictures of him like right up against the well, and I was terrified because what if I dropped my Black Phillip in a well? I took him thousands of miles across the world, and now he's dead. That would have been really sad. My wife's like, "Don't get him too close. Don't get him too close." Like she's invested in now too. But yeah, he's really fun to take places. And yes, he makes a great pillow. He's really useful that way.
Yeah, I just saw him on a plane because I could use that. There you go. So we all need a Black Phillip, I guess.
Would you like to sleep deliciously?
Yeah. Oh. Butter?
Sorry, Black Phillip.
Yeah. You have a fan there, Kiara. Loves seeing Black Phillip in your travel photo. So do you make sure you get pictures with Black Phillip when you travel?
Almost always. Sometimes it might just be a picture of him at a hotel bar. He has a serious drinking problem. Sometimes it just might be a picture of him looking out a hotel window or something. But I take him around. There's like a couple of pictures in Salem with Black Phillip. I don't want to take him anywhere where I think it would be, kind of, I guess, how do I want to put it? Insensitive. Like I'm not going to take him to the Witch Memorial and take a picture of my plushie there. But, like at the Bewitched statue, oh yeah, there's a picture of him on her head somewhere floating around on Instagram. So.
To be fair, I feel like people have done a lot worse things in the Witch Memorial than take a picture of their plushie. So,
yeah,
that's true. That's true. But to me, that's such a sacred spot. I think when I was there, it was just right at sunset, and there's just so much power that all those people died needlessly, and they were accused of being witches, and it's just sad.
I feel like though, like the one that's downtown, that's next to the cemetery, always has felt odd to me because we don't know where any of them are. Most of them, at least, are buried. So there's none of the victims are buried there, but their memorial is right next to one of the judges that killed them. And then, so to me, it's just a weird spot. But if you go to within the past few years, Proctor's Ledge, which has been now collectively decided that's exactly the spot where the executions took place, and you go to the memorial that they built there, you can stand there and almost see just the horror of it all. So that spot to me feels way more sacred than the one that's downtown, because the one that's downtown was just thrown in there. And I don't think that, they did a lot of thought. They did put a lot of thought into like what they put in there. But to me, giving a tour, standing in a place where I'm talking about the victims of the trials, and then I can just point to the judge's grave, like that doesn't feel great to me. I did see, I'm going to get off topic for a second, but Haley, I think, talked about the Fainting Goat Island Inn, which is saying that we should visit the Fainting Goat Island Inn, and which I did on an episode of Scared and Alone. But I went outside and visited the goats there. And Haley, I would just like you to know that I did whisper to them, or not whisper, but excitedly squeal to them, "Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?" while they were eating Fruit Loops out of my hand. So
I love that.
Though. Fruit Loops are good.
They were living their best delicious life in that moment.
Who doesn't like Fruit Loops? That is good.
This broadcast brought to you by the fine people at Kellogg's.
Yeah. Speaking of ghosts, our producer Rob has jumped in, and didn't one of the ghosts of Christmas past have horns? I don't know.
I don't think so. However, the ghost of Christmas present to me always reminds me of Dionysus. The way that he acts, like the joy that seems to be on his face, but also tinged with a little bit of, you better watch what you're doing, because if you don't, I'm going to come and get you. It's very Dionysian. The ghost of Christmas past kind of looked like a candle, and it's often depicted as a young girl. I have a big thing. If anybody knows me, they know how much I love Yule. I've been on Patty's show just to talk about Yule. So yes. I'm very much obsessed with that book.
Good. Okay, and going back now, jumping back about John Proctor, didn't we all meet you first, Courtney, at the John Proctor house with the Scared and Alone, right? Or you met somebody that put us all together somewhere. Tell us about that.
So I met the owners of the John Proctor house very serendipitously. I was both doing tours and being a tour manager. And on this particular evening, I had somebody else scheduled to do the tour. They called out last minute. I was mad and I had to go into work. And I live about an hour away, so that was not what I had on my agenda for the evening. So I went in and I was, I didn't want to go and I was feeling down. And then I started the tour and I got excited and whatever. I had been watching the sale of this house because I was aggressively trying to win the lottery so that I could buy it because I've loved it since I was a kid. And I saw that a couple from California had bought it, and I had done some light stalking of them online to try to see what, they were going to do with it. And I took out my tour. I was having a great time. And then this couple at the end said to me, what can you tell us about John Proctor? And I said, oh, are you a descendant of his? Because that's something that I get on tours a lot. And they said, no, we just bought his house. And I fangirled so hard, I thought that they were going to go running. And it turns out that they had tickets for a different tour that night. And they happened to walk by and think, oh, this time is different. Like, let's do this time instead, and booked on my tour. So neither of us were supposed to be in that place at that time. And it just somehow happened that we were. And I fully believe that was for a reason, because we're now very close friends. And, I've been working with them, building the tour for their house and all that fun stuff. So when the opportunity came up last year about this time to do National Ghost Hunting Day, a live investigation at the Proctor house, the owners didn't want to go ghost hunting, but they were like, oh, I know someone who does. And that was me. then we just, that was that. The dark basement, one of the two basements in the Proctor house.
Wow. And National Ghost Hunting Days, for those who don't know, it was this past weekend.
Yep.
It was this past weekend. I did it last year at the place I was this year at the Wheeler Revival House in Orange, Massachusetts. So I was down the street. We couldn't do that many things at once between all the Hecate stuff we were doing and everything else. Last year was a bit of a 3-ring circus trying to have a ghost hunt, a spiritual experience, and a Paraflix Live. But everybody met you, and we met you, and you became the perfect ghost bait for Scared and Alone, because you have the perfect scared face. And for those people who don't know what Scared and Alone is, Courtney, what is Scared and Alone?
Well, that is what I wanted to be when I grew up, which is ghost bait. It is a live 2-hour investigation where I get, or someone who is being ghost bait, usually me, that gets put into a haunted location completely alone, with just my camera and my selfie stick and my, whatever, K2 meter and flashlight. And I have a panel of amazing para celebrities like yourself, Patty, who's been there, who help guide me along the investigation, as well as the most important part, which is the people who are watching along and chatting along, who can help as well. Tell me, go in that scary spot. Don't, you got to be ghost bait. So it's so much fun. It's so terrifying. We laugh sometimes. It's moving. I've cried on live more times than I'd like to admit. But it's a lot of fun, and it's definitely something you guys should check out. So you can find it at scaredandalone.com.
Yes, and it's live, and you are there, just like you guys are here and commenting now. You get to do it with Courtney. And it really is reverse. All of you who watch all the paranormal shows where there's the team in the haunted house, and then maybe one guy or girl at base camp or whatever, telling them what to do, telling what they see. This is the complete opposite. Courtney, all by her little lonesome, is in the house with her cell phone and maybe a K2 meter or something. And then everybody else is in the safety of their home telling her, don't look behind you. It's really fun. And you are really in the moment. You are really experiencing it. She is experiencing, and she has the best scared face ever.
Patty, that's why the scary movies don't scare me enough, because I live my life in a scary movie when I do these things. And the movies they don't do it better than the real ghosts do it. So I'm waiting for the movie that does.
Okay. Well, I'm really big on scary movies. If they're going to get too witchcrafty, I don't want them to get too. I mean, they could represent what we really do, the good, the bad, and everything else. But I'm real careful about that they don't say things that do things and open portals. That one film that was written kind of about experience I had, my Catch on Fire experience. I'm like, oh, you can't write that, and the writer's like, but you said that. I go, I know I said that, but that does a thing. The spirits or whatever they are aren't going to know the difference of a method actor reading the lines off a script and somebody saying, open the portals to hell or whatever it happens to be. So that, and I really think that that's where the cursed horror films comes, because people they don't know what they're doing. They have to have somebody who knows what they're doing, an expert in the occult or in the craft or whatever they're doing, could go, this sounds really scary, but you won't open the portals to hell. Just my thought.
I play video games online and stream them on Twitch. There's this one game I play that I'm obsessed with called The Mortuary Assistant, and you embalm bodies while also fighting off a demonic possession. But there's names, like you have to figure out the demon's name, and there's all these sigils and stuff, and it lists the names, and I will never read them out loud. And anytime any of my friends play and they start trying to read them, I'm like, don't zip it, don't say it out loud, because you have no idea what you're doing. Do not read them. So I won't. I have not once read one of them out loud. But it's like the same thing, because I don't know. Did the person make this up, or is this, because everything else is very well researched in this game. So I feel like I could be inviting trouble in. You're right.
Good for you.
There are certain people you don't want to invite into your house.
Yeah.
When you say name, you're giving them that invitation.
Well, anyway, we have all sorts of great things we could talk about, but guess what? We can't. So before we go, I want to first thank Courtney for jumping in and being such a brilliant part of this. So let's go through, Courtney, starting with you. Tell everybody where they can find you, any websites, social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. First, let me just say that it was an honor for having me on, letting me fill in. I know, I don't know all the movies ever written, but it was fun, and I have opinions, so I enjoyed being able to share them all with you. I am on all social medias as at the Thefeems, THEFEEMS, which is because of my femur. I collect ethically sourced human remains, so I'm named after that. I'm on Instagram, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, all the good stuff. And then Scared and Alone, you can find the show at scaredandalone.com or on all socials at Scared Alone Live.
Thank you very, very much. Jason?
It's always fun.
I just want to thank Courtney for being with us. You were terrific. Yeah. I hope you come again to the show, because you were just great. This has been so much fun this week. We miss you, Heather. I'm Jason Mankey. I'm one of only 4 Jason Mankeys in the entire United States. I'm easy to find. You just got to Google the name: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. I'm too old for Twitch, though. There's a line. Maybe I'll get there one of these days.
Thank you so much. And I am Patti Negri, pattinegri.com, all the social media. I will never contact you and ask you for money, because there's a lot of fake me's. Patti.negri on Instagram, Patti Negri Psychic Medium, actually my one verified place on Facebook, Patti Negri on Twitter, Patti Negri on TikTok. I'm still figuring that one out. Haven't made it to Twitch yet either. I'm there, but I don't know what to do with it. But please come back next week. Please like us and follow us on social media. Sign up for our stuff. Come back next week, because maybe we'll talk about Hocus Pocus 2.
We have to. We have to.
Yeah. How fun is that?
I'm so excited.
Me too.
I'm so excited.
I want to go put on my cloak in all the right jewel tones and hang with the girls.
Things in Salem have been ramping up. We actually partnered with Disney to hand out posters on our tour the other day. So I snagged a couple, because I cannot live my life without some Hocus Pocus in it.
Hocus pocus. So come back next week. This is the Witches Movie Coven. Social media, YouTube, everything, everywhere. Please like these guys, follow these guys, all of us. Want to thank Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, our producers at Co-Conspiracy Productions. And we love you all. And we love you guys too. You guys were super active today. All of you. We thank you. We couldn't read everything because we just don't read that fast. It's multitasking. I can't do it. I had to keep looking at Philip never mind. Anyway, bye-bye. And now we got to hear how you do this, Courtney. How we end the show is with a witch's cackle. Here we go. Join in, everybody. 1, 2, 3. That's the Witches Movie Coven.
That was fun.